Hello, you're all welcome to another session of our video lesson of our online lesson. Today we are discussing social studies for JHS2. Social studies for JHS2. In the past week we have been discussing entrepreneurship and we've looked at the types of enterprises. We started a discussion on sole proprietorship as a type of enterprise or sole business. Then we looked at partnership as another type of enterprise. Today we are looking at joint stock company. In our 8th lesson, we are looking at joint stock company as another type of business. Joint stock company. I'm expecting that by the end of this lesson, these are our objectives. The students will be able to describe joint stock companies and identify the types. You'll be able to explain some terms associated with joint stock companies and then explain the advantages and disadvantages of joint stock companies. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain the following. That is to prove that you have acquired some knowledge from the lesson. Joint stock company is also called limited liability company. It is a business unit which is formed when people, who are referred to as shareholders, contribute money, which is in the form of shares or stocks, to set up a company. So when people contribute money in the form of shares or stocks to set up a company, that business is called a joint stock company or a limited liability company, because the people have put their stock together, their monies together, their capital together. They do this with the aim of making dividends on their invested capital. So when anybody invests into a joint stock company or contribute their money into a joint stock company, they have the aim of making dividends at the end of the year or making dividends on the capital they have invested. I've been using terms like shares, shareholder, stocks, dividends in my definition of joint stock companies. Let's look at these terms and their meaning. So some terms associated with joint stock companies. And the first one is shares. So when somebody is talking about joint stock companies, or when we are talking about joint stock companies and we mention shares, shares is just a unit of measure of a portion of a business. A portion of a business to which one can claim ownership by buying. So a portion of a business that you can buy and claim ownership of it. That this is my portion in this company is what we call shares. And so anybody that has ownership of a portion of a business will say, I have shares in this company. It means that he is a part owner of that company. It is a portion of a business measured in monetary value which one can buy to become a part owner or investor in a company. So if Kojo buys shares in Belite International School, Kojo becomes a part owner or investor in Belite International School. And so it means that whatever profit Belite International School makes, because Kojo is part of the owners, Kojo will receive a part of that profit. Shareholder. A shareholder is an individual or company that has invested money in a business by buying shares. So anybody who buys shares in a company is called a shareholder. Anybody who buys shares in a company is called a shareholder. He owns a share in the company. It means that he owns a portion of that company. Then we have stocks. Stocks is the total amount of money shareholders invest in a business. That is, it is the total value of company shares. So, if Kojo Menu Enterprise is selling shares or is floating shares, anybody who buys shares in Kojo Mensa Enterprise is a shareholder in that company because he owns a share in the company. For that matter, he owns part of that company. Then all the individual shareholders and the shares they have bought. So if Ama bought 10,000 cedis shares, Kofi bought 2,000 cedis shares, Kwabna bought 3,000 cedis shares, and Ajwa bought 5,000 cedis shares, the total will be 20,000 cedis shares. So the total amount of shares, the total value of shares bought by the shareholders, that is the total money they have invested into the business, is what we call the stocks. The stocks. Then invested capital. Invested capital is the total amount of money an individual invests into a business. That is the number of shares one has in a business. So we're talking about Kojo Mensa Enterprise. If Kojo Mensa Enterprise has floated shares or is floating shares, and Ama buys 10,000, Kofi buys 2,000, Ajwa buys 3,000, and then another person also buys 5,000, that is 20,000. So the total stock, that is the total value of shares in the company, the stock is 20,000. But every single individual's amount of shares they bought is what we call the invested capital. So if Ama bought 10,000 cedis worth of shares, it means that Ama's invested capital is 10,000. If Ajwa bought 3,000 cedis worth of shares, it means Ajwa's invested capital is 3,000 cedis. So with this, then we can say that the stock is the total invested capital of all shareholders. But the individual person's money that they invested into the business is what we call the invested capital. Okay, so the total amount of money an individual invests into a business, that is the number of shares one has in a business. Then dividends. So I mentioned dividends in my earlier explanation of joint stock company. And then shares. So dividends is the profit shareholders receive at the end of year on their investments made. So when shareholders invest into any business, at the end of the year, when the business makes profit, a part of that profit is shared among the shareholders as the profits on their investment. Dividends. So dividends is the profit shareholders receive at the end of the year on their invested capital or on their investments. So when I buy 20,000 worth of shares in MTN Ghana, it means that at the end of the year, when MTN makes profit, they share a portion of it among their shareholders, or they divide a portion of it among their shareholders. And because I'm a shareholder and I hold about 20,000 cedis worth of shares in MTN Ghana, what will happen is that I will also get a profit, or I also get a portion of the profit that is being shared. And that portion I get is what we call dividends. Now, let's look at the types of joint stock companies. There are two main types of joint stock companies as follows. You have private limited liability company, private limited liability company, and then public limited liability company. Public limited liability company. Remember that we said joint stock companies are also called limited liability companies. So this only means that we can have private joint stock companies and then public joint stock companies. A private limited liability company is a company formed by private individuals, and it has a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 50 people. It means that in a private limited liability company or in a private joint stock company, it can't take more than 50 people as shareholders. And it can't take less than 2. Then it cannot float shares on the Ghana Stock Exchange. And examples of private limited liability companies are PZ Ghana Limited, popularly known as PZ Cousins. They produce a wide range of products from drugs like Zeus and the rest to detergents and then other sanitary products. And then we also have Unilever Ghana Limited. It's also a private limited liability company. Then a public limited liability company is a joint stock company that has minimum of 7 members but unlimited number of members or shareholders. So, a public limited liability company, unlike the private, should have a minimum of 7. If the members are not up to 7, then it will not even qualify to be a public limited liability company. But for private limited, even 2 is enough to qualify. And for public limited liability company, there is no limit for the number of shareholders. It could be as many as 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 1 billion people owning shares in one company. That is for public limited liability companies. Some are wholly owned by the state, and there are others jointly owned by the state and some private individuals. Examples are the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, GBC, the Volta River Authority, VRA, and the Ghana Oil Limited, that is GOIL. GOIL, for example, is a public, private owned or is a jointly owned company. It is owned partly by the state and partly by private individuals. And I think one of the biggest individual shareholders in GOIL is the current one of the current ministers of state. So you take note of the difference between the private and the public limited liability companies. Characteristics of joint stock companies. Joint stock companies have legal identity. When we say they have legal identity, it means that the company is a separate entity from the owners. And so the company can sue and be sued. So if you take a joint stock company to court for any reason, you are not taking the owners to court, but it is the business that you are taking to court. And in the same way, the business can also sue. It means that the business is given a persona, a personality, so that it is treated as a person. Then joint stock companies have limited liability. Means their liabilities cannot be extended to private properties of shareholders. So in the case of issues of debt, that is indebtedness or bankruptcy, the shareholders' private properties should not be touched in defraying or in paying for those debts, because the joint stock company have limited liability. Continuity is guaranteed in the case of death or resignation of any member. Unlike in sole proprietorship, where when the owner dies, the company comes to an end, or in the case of partnership, where sometimes when one person is out, the business goes down. In joint stock company, continuity is guaranteed. Whether a person resigns or a member dies or some members leave, because the company is a separate entity on its own and the managers are different from the owners, the business can continue. Then, Joint stock companies also have a wide range or source of fund. They have a large source of fund. They have a very wide range of source of funding, and because they have the legal right to source funds from any legally accepted source, so they can get funds from financial companies, from credit unions, from loans, and so on, bank overdrafts, and so many other sources they can get their funding from. Except that for private limited liability companies, they cannot float shares. Only the public ones can float shares in the Ghana Stock Exchange. It is also required of public joint stock companies to publish their annual accounts in the dailies. So, a public joint stock company is supposed to publish their accounts at the end of every year in the dailies, all the dailies around, Daily Graphic, Daily Dispatch, The Spectator, Daily Guide, and the rest. They're supposed to select some dailies and publish their accounts, because there are so many people who own part of that company or who have shares in the company, and so should know how the company is doing financially. Then public limited liability companies have no restrictions to the number of shareholders, but private ones can have maximum of 50. So you take note of that. Advantages and disadvantages of joint stock company. Joint stock companies have limited liability. For joint stock companies, advantages: continuity is assured. Then joint stock companies have the advantage of a large capital pool. Because so many people come together, they can pool their resources together and have large capital to start very big businesses. Then in joint stock companies, they share risk. And so, unlike sole proprietorship where one person bears all the risk, in joint stock company, the risk is shared. Disadvantages of joint stock company is that there is lack of privacy. Like, for example, you have to publish financial reports on how the business is doing financially, especially with public joint stock companies. And with private joint stock companies, you have to hold annual meetings to disclose your financial issues to shareholders and other important issues. Then absence of interest on the side of managers is another problem. Because the owners are different from the managers, sometimes negligence and then absence of interest on the side of managers can pull the company down, because they are not the direct owners, and so sometimes they may not be committed to the success of the company. Then another disadvantage is that joint stock companies are very difficult to establish, because there are a lot of legal issues surrounding joint stock company. There are lots of legal requirements you must meet before you'll be able to establish a joint stock company. And sometimes pulling all the people together to establish a joint stock company is very difficult, and so it's not easy to start. How do joint stock companies get their funds? How do they make money? How do they gather money to start up, or to reinvest into the business, or to expand the business? How do they get money? Floating of shares on the Ghana Stock Exchange is one. So they float shares. Oh, this company is floating shares. You can buy 1 share or 2 shares. You can buy 2 shares or a minimum of 10 shares, a minimum of 100 shares. 1 at 50 pesos, 1 at 20 pesos. Some few years back, I think some 2 years back or 3, MTN Ghana was floating shares, and a lot of people went to buy some. So you can buy shares, they can float shares, and when people buy these shares, the money that they get from the floating of shares is invested into the company to expand it. Then borrowing from financial institutions. Because joint stock companies have legal identity, they find borrowing, or they find it easier to borrow from financial institutions. Then reinvesting profit into business is another source of fund. Sometimes joint stock companies can reinvest what they have already earned from their investment into the business. Then purchasing goods on credit. Yes, sometimes joint stock companies can purchase goods. They can negotiate with their suppliers and purchase goods and services on credit, so that they are relieved of immediate financial burdens that should compel them to use physical cash to pay. And so these are some ways joint stock companies source funding. Contribution of joint stock companies to the economy. Contribution of joint stock company to the economy, not partnerships. Joint stock companies to the economy. Okay, so like any other business, joint stock companies create employment. They employ a lot of people. Then, especially because joint stock companies have large capital, most of them are very big companies. You can think of a company like Volta River Authority, a company like Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, a company like Ghana Commercial Bank, a company like Unilever Ghana, PZ Cousins. These are very big companies that employ a lot of people, from factory hands to engineers to managers to laborers, drivers, all sort of professions you can think of. Then they generate income to the state in the form of taxes, rent, rates, tolls, royalties, and so on. And then employees also get paid, and they pay income taxes on their salaries. Then foreign exchange generation. There are services and products from joint stock companies that go out of the country, brings foreign exchange. Joint stock companies also identify new markets by introducing new products and new services to meet the growing needs of today's society. This brings us to the end of our discussion on joint stock companies. If you missed anything, go back and play the video again, and then consult your textbooks and read wider to get more knowledge on the subject or on the topic for discussion. But you answer the following questions as a test of your knowledge on what we have discussed so far. Define the following in association to joint stock companies: shares, dividends, shareholder. Number 2, state 2 characteristics of joint stock companies. And number 3, identify 2 sources of funds to the joint stock companies. I wish you good luck. This brings us to the end of today's lesson. Continue observing all the COVID-19 safety protocols. Keep washing your hands regularly. Keep using your hand sanitizers. It is now illegal and criminal to go out without a nose mask. Please, don't leave your house without a nose mask. Stay safe and keep learning. Bye-bye.